Thank you. It's delightful to be here. And as I'm going to unpack the story today, we're going to start in the future, and then we're going to jump into the past. And I think it's particularly interesting to be able to come and talk to graduate students here at BC. I mean, one of the great treasures of a Jesuit university is the depth of character and the history and the visioning that happens in a Jesuit institution. This notion that we're charged to discover what we love, discover what we're good at, and then to map that onto what the world needs. And to think of success not in the context of happiness, but in the context of great work to be done. And I feel privileged to have been able to spend the last 15 years here at Boston College, and I wear a couple of different hats. I'm a professor in the biology department. I'm founding director of the environmental studies program here at Boston College, and then also the founding science director of the Urban Ecology Institute. And those pieces I'll unpack in just a moment. The interesting news for me looking into the future is that with mixed emotion, but much excitement, I am spending my last semester here at Boston College, and I will be accepting a presidential professorship at Loyola Marymount University in the fall, one of the Jesuit universities here in the United States. And I will be a professor of urban ecology, and am charged with starting a new undergraduate and graduate program there. And so I'm trying to take the gifts that I've gotten here and bring them to a new community. And so when you start like that, and I remember being a graduate student in the 1980s, and you'd hear professors my age, I'm in my 50s, I'm out of warranty by now, but I've got the extended service plan, so I hope I'm okay. You say, wow, you know, he must have started off thinking he was going to be a professor, and there's this straight line towards the achievements that we've been able to do, or the luck we've been able to step into. And the reality is, of course, that's not the way it is. So I actually want to start this conversation in a very different position. I was 16 years old. I had dropped out of high school. I was working full-time as a motorcycle mechanic on Cape Cod. And I was doing that because, for a couple of reasons. My parents had divorced about 5 years earlier. My mom was a special needs teacher in the Native American school on Cape Cod in Mashpee. And her specialty was using art and music as an entree into teaching disabled children. And she had, 2 years before that, fallen in her classroom and shattered her knee. And it was before the era of knee replacements. And so she was pretty seriously disabled, and was then for the rest of her life. And she lost her job and went on workman's compensation, which in that period of time, in the mid-70s, was $94 a week. And if you added all of that up over the month, that paid our mortgage at the house plus $100. And so we were going to lose the house. And my choice was, at the age of 15, turning 16, to watch my mom. I was an only child, I had no brothers and sisters. And I had sort of early on, when my parents split, took on a responsibility role in my family, and enjoyed that role, and actually got lots of adult benefits for doing that. I said to my mom, and we talked, you know, we needed to do something. And so I had been passionate about off-road motorcycles and had been racing for about 1.5 years, and had been pretty precocious with my mechanical skills. I was doing the regular high school curriculum during the morning, and in the evening I was going to the tech school and learning welding and auto and motorcycle mechanics. And so the dealership that had actually been sponsoring my racing realized the situation. They said, well, we'll give you a job. We want you to go back to school. We'll give you a job. So I dropped out my sophomore year, and I worked full-time. And by the end of that year, I was feeling very grown up at 16 years of age. And I was actually earning as much, if not more, than my mom was on her disability. And so I was of the mind that there was no reason to go back to school. I had a good job. I had very adult responsibilities. I felt really great being able to take care of my mom. In fact, the cohort of people that I knew in the high school were thinking of me as somebody that they were emulating, because they were stuck in high school, and here I was driving back and forth to work and stopping by to see them now and again in the social circles, and had a lot of cash because I was working. My mom really wanted me to go back to school, and she at that time then was returning to work, which failed again because of her condition, but she then had started her own business and was doing antique and modern weather vanes, and ended up becoming a very successful national project. So the cash was coming into the house again. But I still actually didn't want to go back, and what happened is I met a high school teacher there who would go on to be an extraordinary mentor of mine, a fellow by the name of Peter Auger, who had started this new course at the high school. It was taught without textbooks. It was called Ecology, which is a word I didn't even understand in the 1970s. And he said, what it really is spending time outside, which you love to do, and engaging nature in new ways. And he said, I know you don't want to go back to high school, but we have this field station that we're running out on Sandy Neck Beach, which is about 6 miles from the high school and about 2 miles from where I lived. And we really need somebody with technical expertise, because we're trying to run boats, and we're trying to run off-road vehicles, and these are very difficult conditions, and the stuff keeps breaking. And would you come and check out what we're doing? And of course, this was a hook. And so once I went out there, I was hooked. And so I went back to high school as a junior, missing my entire sophomore year, incredibly engaged in this new field of ecology in his course. I actually ended up graduating with my own class in 1977, but I was ranked 380th in my class. And so despite the fact that I had reasonable grades, you miss a whole year of school, there's an issue, as well there should be, because there are other kids who'd taken an additional year's worth of class, and some of them more advanced courses, so they got more quality points and all that. So I applied to the traditional round of schools, and got great letters of recommendation, because he has this great story, and I got a lot of no thank yous from schools. So I started out at my local community college and was there with a cohort of graduates who were looking at me and saying, what are you doing at a community college? But for me, the community college was an incredible blessing and an opportunity to get my foot onto the ladder of higher education. And the professors that I had there were absolutely extraordinary, because we're sort of lucky. Cape Cod is a wonderful place to retire to. And so at that time in the 1970s, the community college was blessed with a lot of retired professors from great institutions who still wanted to teach and have their hand in it. And so I'd always loved learning. And so I didn't really pick a major there as much as figure out who the great professors were and to take every course that they offered. And so that was a real powerful entree for me. At that time, I was still interested in science, but the technology piece was really what captivated me. And I drifted away from the sciences and actually towards communication. And I became director of the radio station at the community college, which most community colleges don't have a very big radio station, but this station was actually, because it was Cape Cod and there were no other universities, it was a 1,000-watt station, and it was heard everywhere on the Cape. And so it was actually the community's nonprofit station. And it was run pretty professionally, and I ended up directing the station for about a year and a half, and I got really excited about it. So I transferred not to a science school, but I transferred to Emerson College in Boston, and was doing a radio and television major. And I had a radio show in Boston in the mornings. It's still on 88.9 WERS, called The Coffee House. It's on from 6 to 9 in the morning. And I was committing myself to broadcast journalism because I love the whole concept of narrative and sense of place and storytelling. But after about a year and a half at Emerson, I began to become a bit disillusioned, because I felt that we were investing significant time in becoming storytellers and communicators. But the story we were telling was basically trying to convince our audience to buy this brand of soap, or that kind of car, or this type of home product. And there was a real sense of crisis for me because I was doing well at Emerson, but I was pretty unhappy. And who should come into my life again but this same high school teacher, who by that time had been convinced that if he was really going to do and commit to citizen science, which was his dream, and he was a fascinating guy, he went to that high school, Barnstable High School, as a student, and he went on to Amherst College, and he was a multi-sport athlete, and he was, after he graduated from Amherst, accepted to medical school and drafted by the Yankees to play baseball. And he deferred on both and came back to the local high school to teach and coach. And I first met him in his third year. So he was a pretty young teacher, not that much older than I was. And so he realized that after teaching for he'd been now teaching for about 5 or 6 years, he needed to get an advanced degree if he was going to do real science. So at that time, the economy was pretty good in the United States, and his high school gave him a 2-year sabbatical to go and do coursework towards a PhD at Tufts University, which is only about 5 miles away from Emerson. So we had stayed in contact with each other, and he said, "Eric, you need to come up and sit in on these seminars." Because he was studying animal behavior, and at that time there was a radical new idea that was sweeping through behavior and ecology, and it was led by a scientist by the name of Ed Wilson, or E.O. Wilson, who was at Harvard at the time, and the movement was called sociobiology. And it was trying to understand animal behavior and human behavior from a genetic perspective. And since in the past 30 years, the movement has transformed psychology, it's transformed education theory, it's transformed how we do ecology. But at this time, the seminal book, which was very controversial at the time, had just come out. It had just come out in 1976. So this was brand new, really cool stuff. And so I was on the air in the morning, I'd take my courses, I'd be done by about noon, and I would show up at Tufts University in the afternoon to sit in on the seminars that Pete Auger was sitting in on. And I suddenly realized that I was putting together this vision of now there was a very interesting story to tell. And this was the story of animal behavior and how we can understand the human condition by looking at other facets of nature. I got so excited about it, I actually left Emerson College a semester early. I had enough credits to graduate, so I left in December. And was meeting with folks at Tufts and said, "I know what I want to do. I want to get a PhD in biology." And they said, "Well, that's very interesting." I was attending these seminars, and I was reading all the papers, and I was very jazzed about it. And they said, "Well, it's traditional if you get a PhD in the sciences that you have some undergraduate training in the sciences." And I went, yeah, I get it. So I actually found the advisor I was going to work with, who was a wonderful guy, Benjamin Dane, and he was Pete Auger's advisor. And Pete Auger was working on an endangered turtle species that I started working on with him in high school. We picked a species for me to work on, an endangered shorebird species. And they said, "Look, you start gathering your data now. Go back to the community college and get the calculus and the organic chemistry and physical chemistry and physiology that you didn't have. And you'll be a stronger candidate. You won't have as much courses, but if you do this right, you'll actually come back to Tufts and enter a PhD program with 3 years of data." It's a very different approach. So what am I going to do in this 3 years? And I had a wonderful opportunity. A friend of my mom's, who was one of the selectmen in the town, offered me a job as a police officer. And I had never, ever considered being a police officer. It never occurred to me. And they said, "Well, look, you have these communication skills. You love the community that you're in. And it will teach you some discipline to go through the police academy." And so I did. I said, "Yeah, okay, this sounds good." So I went through the police academy. I'd never fired a firearm in my life. And there I was on the firing range. And, you know, I had no bad habits. I had no habits at all. I ended up qualifying as a marksman. And it was pretty interesting. So I graduated from the police academy, and I was sent over into division of conservation. And so I was doing off-road motorcycle, off-road vehicle, hunting and fishing. And so I wore a green uniform, drove a green cruiser, not the traditional police cruiser. So it was fascinating. I got to be out in the environment for my work. And so it was great. I was doing my shorebird studies in the morning, and then I negotiated with the police chief to do 4 to midnight shifts. And so I would be out in the field with Pete Auger and the gang doing field studies, and then around 3 o'clock I'd go back to my house, take a shower, put my police uniform on, put my gun on. I kept the cruiser at that time was pretty laid back. The force was pretty big. I mean, there were 60 police officers, but I could keep the cruiser at my house. And then I get in the car, and I'm on duty now, and back out in the same areas that I was doing research in. So I did that for 3 years, and got accepted into a PhD program at Tufts. And as I got into this program, the funding for ecology was almost non-existent. Even though Tufts was what we call an R1 university, which means they had a fair amount of research money, the research money for our particular work was not forthcoming. So I ended up teaching every semester that I was there. So I had my tuition remission, but I was also teaching. And for me, that was really important because I wanted to do research, as I still do, but deep down I wanted to be a storyteller. And so the idea that I could commit to teaching while I was in graduate school and end up leaving graduate school after 7 years with 14 semesters of teaching allowed me to have a skill set that actually allowed me to move sideways and unpredictably into the world of academics. I had assumed at the end of my graduate career that there would be no positions in academia for me because it was hyper competitive. An ecologist applied for a position and there'd be 150 people applying for the job, and you could be in the top 1% and still finish third. So I was actually preparing to go into environmental consulting. And in the last year of graduate school, my colleague Pete Auger, who had now gotten his PhD and gone back to high school to teach, he and I formed a for-profit consulting company, a limited partnership. We had a board of directors, and we were in high demand because the study of endangered species comes head-to-head with environmental policy with respect to development and environmental management. And Pete was one of the leading national authorities on endangered turtle species, and I had the same capacity with endangered shorebirds. And so our skills were in high demand. And the compensation rates for people working in environmental consulting was much higher than being a professor. So I had assumed that was the direction I was going to go and hoped that would, somehow lead into some other position because I really did love teaching. And at UMass Boston in the summer of 1990, in August, their dean in their College of Natural Sciences received a fellowship to go on to the national academies. So they needed a new dean, and they drafted the dean out of the biology department. And then on August 15th, they suddenly needed a professor to teach ecology and those courses. And they had no time to go and do a traditional search. So through the network in Boston, they were saying, is there somebody who could step in a week's notice and being a competent teacher and teach courses they'd never seen before? And I had given talks in Boston, and folks had known about this sort of crazy ex-police officer who was becoming an ecologist. And then I got a Howard Hughes teaching fellowship. I was the first Howard Hughes fellow at Tufts University to get this teaching fellowship. And they said, yeah, I think we got a guy who could step in and teach these courses with a week to get prepared for it. So I was offered a visiting assistant professorship at UMass Boston, which turned into a 6-year job, turned into an assistant professorship. And it was wonderful. It was what I wanted to do. And it's a funny story because I learned now in this latest job, you're supposed to negotiate your salary and you're supposed to negotiate this stuff. So the department chair calls me and says, yes, we want to offer you this job. And the week before, when there was a chance I could get the job, he called and asked me to drop off a a resume, a CV. So because I had been preparing for a job as an environmental consultant, my CV was all wrong, all wrong. So I stayed up all night getting it right. And I literally was sitting on the floor against the secretary's door at like 6 in the morning the next day because I wanted this job. It was like a dream job. So she arrived. She thought it was really funny that I was sitting there because I'd actually sort of fallen asleep and my head was against the door. And UMass Boston is their primary clientele or primary students that they're in service to are first generation college students. And the typical age of the undergraduates is 30. And I was 30. So she assumed I was an undergraduate who'd either failed a course and wanted to see a professor or something like that. And I was like, no, I'm applying for the professor job. And she laughed out loud. So I got invited, and then I got the job, which is really cool. And I was supposed to come and do the contract. And so I showed up at the department chairman's office. I was really excited. His name was Kamal Bava. He was from India. And his English was not great. But you could see he was this incredibly warm and cool guy who was doing great plant ecology work and ended up being a member of the National Academy of Sciences, great scientist. So he says, we're very excited to have you on board. And he shows me this contract. And he said, we want you to, and so, here's the contract. And I just started to sign it. He went, no, Eric, wait. You're supposed to negotiate. I said, I don't care. I want this job so bad. And so he takes his pen and he scratches out the compensation and adds $4,000 to it. And he said, this is probably where we would have ended up. And so it was just like this incredible dream to have gotten this job. And so this was 1990. And I got hired in August. And I got my layoff notice in October because the economy was as bad as it is now. And I was going to be able to teach through December, and so you go through this incredible roller coaster of emotions. I finally got this job, and I was so excited the first day going to school. I got to the office at like 4:30 in the morning, and I didn't even have my keys yet. I'm sitting out in my car going, I want to go in. I want to see my office. It's going to be so cool. And then they're going to lay me off. And in the state system in Massachusetts, it's a union job. And so the union voted to do a one-day furlough of all of the faculty so there would be enough to pay my annual salary. And they did it for 2 years in a row. It ended up being a bluff because they didn't actually have to go through with it, but they did in case they really were going to lay me off because I was the only full-time faculty member hired at UMass Boston in 1990. The economy was so bad. And I was only hired because the dean had negotiated and stuff. So it was this very unexpected thing and felt very, very lucky. But I was always worried there because I was always the youngest faculty member, so I would be the first one cut. So a former graduate student from Tufts University who'd worked with the same professor as I did, Ben Dane, was teaching here at BC. His name was Robert Wolf, and he runs the pre-med program. And he called me up and he said, Eric, we have some part-time teaching slots here. And I know that you love UMass, but there's some, it's tenuous there, as you know, and, because I tell him what was going on. He said, would you be interested in possibly taking a course here? And I said, sure. And it was Survey of Biology, which in 1991 had 92 students. And I took that course and loved it, and I taught for 3 years part-time there and full-time at UMass. And they gave me more courses in animal behavior. And I was hired at UMass ultimately to develop the environmental studies program. And I sent the proposal to Bill Petrie and Dean Barth and said, we really need one here at BC because I'd been teaching part-time here for 3 years and saw there was no coherent environmental program. And they said, well, could you implement the program here? And I said, I'd love to try. And so they offered me the job. And so I moved here to BC about 15 years ago and started the environmental studies program. And in the second year of the program, and I'm going to finish up quickly because I want to have an opportunity for you to ask questions. We started the program in 1997. And we had lots of science opportunities because the first thing I did when I got the job was hire Pete Auger to come teach here at BC. because we'd been running the field station together then for almost 20 years together. And we now had the field station on Cape Cod, wonderful opportunities for students to do interdisciplinary science. But what was missing was the policy side and the community engagement side in the urban context. And so I had the great good fortune of being introduced to two environmental lawyers in the fall of 1997. One of them was Charlie Lord, who had been the executive director for Alternatives for Community and Environment, which was responsible in large part for the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, which was one of the poorest neighborhoods in Boston that was transformed through environmental justice interventions and really cool stuff. And his law school partner, Max Kennedy, who was one of Robert Kennedy's sons. And the two of them were introduced to me by Zig Plotter, who was a professor in the law school, who was an advisor to the environmental studies program. And he knew those two guys, and he said, you know, you need to meet Eric, because Eric's running this field station down in Cape Cod and doing community-based participatory research and citizen science. And maybe he could help you develop a program in the urban context. So they came and talked to me, and I got really fired up about taking these urban, underserved communities and introducing them to the kind of science that could be done in the urban context. Because our studies involve radio telemetry with coyotes and white-tailed deer and birds and turtles. Very easy things for communities to get involved with. And all these animals are in the city. They're also in the city, so they can be engaged. And I said, yeah, I think it'd be a great idea to do that. And the dilemma was that there was no infrastructure at BC in order to make that happen. There was no department that did ecology. There's the biology department, there's the geology department, but no ecology group. So we basically were challenged by then Dean Barth and Department Chair Bill Petrie to start our own program. And we did it by starting a nonprofit organization, a 501(c) called the Urban Ecology Institute. And over time, that program grew to 14 employees and almost a $2 million annual budget. But it's all soft money. We have to raise the money each year because Boston College doesn't pay for any of the salaries of the folks at the Urban Ecology Institute. They kindly provide space and provide infrastructure, at least they did for the first 11 years of our program. And we grew it from there. And so being here at BC has been this extraordinary opportunity to be a very non-traditional professor, helping to run a nonprofit organization, running a field station down on Cape Cod. We had also the great good fortune of writing a high school textbook and doing a television series, which connects to my roots as a communicator. We're about to launch a new textbook and curriculum program in urban ecology. We'll have the first national textbook in urban sciences. And it's been possible because of this milieu that we've been able to create at BC and the support of folks that are here. So, and I'm about to start the next chapter of my life. I'm about to go off to Loyola Marymount in a position that I never thought I'd have, a presidential professorship, and to start a new program. And instead of starting it as an outsider, as I did at BC, I'm going to be an insider, literally coming out of the president's office and with the university saying, this is what we're doing, folks. Rally around this idea. And it's a wonderful and exciting challenge that wouldn't have been possible without the extraordinary opportunities that we were able to create here at BC and the kind of people we were able to work with. And so when I think of the 16-year-old whose passion was motorcycles and the community of people that I met, and one of the reasons I fell in love with off-road motorcycling is it had such a bad reputation, and I was going to turn it around. And so we started an organization called the New England Trail Rider Association that worked to help other users of parks be more efficient. So for instance, when the horse, so one of the things we do very well as a racing organization is to run events. And other folks don't have as much experience of that. So the New England Trail Rider Association would help to run the horse events, would help to run Boy Scout events, Girl Scout events, those kind of things. And it began to create a different identity. As off-road motorcyclists, we weren't seen as destructive forces. This was our sport. And we would like to share the outdoors with you. And from hobby standpoint, I no longer do off-road motorcycling because there's no space to do it on Cape Cod. It's too crowded. I've become a mountain biker. And so I belong to, of course, the Mountain Bike Association and work to create environmental opportunities for mountain bikers and other users to get together and find ways to share the land. And that led to the opportunity to chair the Regional Environmental Commission on Cape Cod for 10 years. So I've never been an administrator, but I had the opportunity. They said, would you like to serve on the commission? I said, yes. Within about 6 months, they said, would you like to chair the commission? And I don't know what Kool-Aid I'd been drinking, but I said yes. It was a volunteer position that was taking about 20 hours of my time, as well as doing all this other stuff. But it gave me opportunities to do things that I didn't think I'd be able to do. And so, I encourage you as graduate students to think broadly about the context of what you think you want to do. Find out what your core values are, because you need to engage in your core mission, even if you think that mission is something else. For me, it was community. For me, it was narrative. It was sense of place. It was mission. The idea that you're fighting the good fight, the Don Quixote model, is really what engages me. I'm passionately concerned about the underdog. I'm passionately concerned about folks who are underrepresented and are misunderstood. One of the biggest challenges in my life was helping my mom, who was first generation college and had graduated at the top of her class in Wittenberg and had done graduate studies and PhD work and was a pioneer, and to see how hard it was in the 70s for a divorced woman to even get any credit, and then to become disabled, and then to get cancer and have this long struggle, and see just how hard it was and how easily dismissed she was in the context of the society that she had been at the top of her game, and how quickly she was dismissed. And so, those are the things that motivate me to do my work. And so I have the next chapter laid in front of me, but as I told my new dean, this won't be my last job, it will be my next job. And I don't know what I'll be doing in 10 years. I know what I'm going to be doing in the fall, but I don't know what I'm going to be doing in 10 years. And I think you have to leave yourself open to those kind of considerations, especially the young folks in the crowd. You're going to live to be 100 years of age. So you're going to have 60 or 70 years of careers. And I hope you don't do the same thing for that amount of time. Life will seem very, very long if that's the case. And you're not going to be able to retire. And arguably, why should you? When Social Security was implemented in the 1960s and the Johnson administration, when people retired at 65, the average life expectancy was 68. So Social Security was a way to die with dignity, not a way to live a long retirement. And so we have people now who think it's okay to stop working at 55 and somehow have the buoyancy of society support you for the next, 50 years? Maybe? Why is that an appropriate expectation? That's the thing I don't understand. Why is that an appropriate expectation? We need to find the things we love and to do them till we can't get up anymore. And then when we can't get up anymore, there should be a social safety net to help us. But as long as we're able-bodied, why shouldn't we be expected to toil in service to the communities that give us so much? It's such an interesting juxtaposition. And the blessings that we have as graduate students and members of an elite community, those people that get to go to college, is that we accept the burden of working all of our lives and we get to have choice. Only about 5% of the world's population gets to go to college. Only half the world's population ever gets to talk on a phone. And so you think about the level of elite privilege that any of us sitting in this room already have. Why do we think that we should be able to check out at 55 or something like that? It's just amazing.